Good evening. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Policy and Services Committee for Tuesday, October 27th, 2015. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Berman?
Here.
Councilmember Du Bois?
Here.
Chair Burt?
Here.
Councilmember Woolbach?
Here.
Four
Great.
present.
Thank you. At this time, we provide an opportunity for the public to speak on items that are not otherwise agendized, and I don't have any speaker cards. So we'll move on to the first item tonight, which is a discussion and direction to staff regarding Palo Alto's revolving door ordinance. And good evening.
Thank you, Chair
Paul, you're
Burt.
taking the lead?
Committee members, I am taking the lead on this item. So this is an item that comes from a comment that was made by Councilmember Mayor Holman at the Council's retreat in January or February. And in a way, it's kind of taken on a little bit of a life of its own. As I understood the initial comment, it was motivated by a concern about current city employees who may be considering employment or making arrangements to become employed by a private entity while they were city employees. And she had a concern to make sure that those individuals, while they were still employed by the city, were acting with full loyalty to the public interest and in support of the council and its priorities. And I think there was a belief perhaps on her part that there was some kind of time limit as there are on that type of activity as there are in many areas of public ethics law. As it turns out, there isn't a time limit on that. So for example, if a city employee were to make an arrangement or a commitment with an employer to go and work for a future employer, to work for them many years hence upon leaving city service in 3 or 5 years, no matter how far out that commitment is, that city official would have a conflict of interest with respect to that employer and any governmental decision that comes before the city. So there's no limitation on the time. We did, though, start to process this question of whether there should be some amendment to the council's local rule on revolving door, and not focusing so much on that issue, but on the post-employment restrictions. There is a state law that applies to all cities, counties, and special districts that sets a floor. Local agencies are allowed to set higher restrictions, and Palo Alto does have a local ordinance that extends the restrictions in state law to a number of additional officials. There is a mistake in the staff report. I neglected to note that the restrictions under our local ordinance also apply to my position, the city clerk, and the city auditor, because those are positions that are confirmed by council or approved by council. So that's Palo Alto's local rule. It applies to all of the positions that the council approves, and we did identify those in the report. We did some survey work and looked at some prominent local ordinances that do provide for greater restrictions. This is a pretty complicated area. There are a lot of different areas where local jurisdictions have chosen to regulate primarily in response to particular issues or problems that have developed in those jurisdictions. We're not aware of any particular issues here. The council may have some concerns, in which case I would suggest that we take a targeted approach aimed at those concerns, and maybe two areas where it might make sense, if council does want a stricter local rule, would be to expand the number or the type of officials who are subject to these restrictions. And then a second area that might be of interest to the council would be to extend the period of time that the revolving door restriction applies. State law is 1 year. That is also our local current rule. It could be extended to 2 years. But we're happy to support whatever additional areas you may have concerns about or want to explore. The report does include descriptions of some additional areas, and we can answer questions or describe them however you wish to proceed, Chair Burt.
So you're not making any recommendations based on these other cities' policies?
My best recommendation, based on what I have observed, is that we file the report, we have this information, and we're prepared to respond if there is a particular concern. I'm not aware of one now, and I don't think there's a reason to adopt a regulation in the absence of a specific issue that you wish to address. If the committee feels differently, of course, we'll move forward, but we don't have a recommendation at this time.
And was there, I seem to recall that there was a discussion, we currently have a 1-year period, and whether to extend that to 2 years, I thought was raised.
Yes, I think we did have some general discussion, and that's something that's relatively straightforward that council could do.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, discussion? Tom?
So I'm curious, in Palo Alto, it's positions approved by council. Is the way the management hierarchy works, are there peers, some of which are approved by council and some aren't, but they're at the same management level? So there's inconsistency between
Yes, there
positions?
are. So our current municipal code is a little bit of a patchwork when you line it up with our current management structure. It may be that the municipal code was initially drafted to capture essentially the department heads and the CAOs. It does that imperfectly now.
Yeah.
It leaves off some department heads.
So I'd be interested in exploring a consistent level of management, council-appointed officers, and I guess it's one level down from that. Is that correct?
Perhaps it might make sense to say council-appointed officers and city department heads.
Yeah, but yeah, I'd like it to be consistent so that people that are basically at the same management level. I don't know if there are places where we have a department head and somebody else in that department that has the same level of title. I'm not really sure how our job classifications work. But, will we have multiple directors where one's a department head and one's not?
No.
Okay. Looking at comparisons to other cities, I'm not sure about the 2 years. I'm not sure how unattractive that makes, working at Palo Alto if you have to wait an extra year. But I am interested in, I guess, in who's covered and who's not covered. I thought San Jose was interesting that it also covers former commission members. And I don't know, again, I don't know all the history, but again, with like 27 University, I don't know if that was an issue there.
Yes. So two comments. One is, if there have been areas where these issues have been raised, even in a peripheral way, it was probably in the planning area. So that may suggest a look at those key commissions that do that work. However, San Francisco and San Jose, where they are covering former commissioners, those bodies do have final decision-making authority in some respects. And in Palo Alto, we are structured so that all final decision-making authority is retained by the council.
So even though that's true, I think it is a little, I don't know, it has the appearance of not being transparent if a former commissioner's presenting to the board they used to be on themselves. So I think that's just something to think about. I think that's my comments. So, thanks.
Colleagues, Mark or Corey?
Yeah, actually, I guess the only couple of things that really stood out to me as worth discussion, or at least they were intriguing, are the question of whether to go from 1 to 2 years. I think that's worth discussing. I see pros and cons, and we just heard that hinted at. Maybe at some point clean up on the language to actually, it was mentioned, maybe clean up on the language just to make it more clear and concise rather than trying to identify each position. But I guess you could argue that either way. And on the staff report, page 5, the staff report identified at the top 4 bullet points talking about things prohibited in San Francisco. The first one of those, I was not very clear on what all that might include. So if staff has any maybe expansion upon those comments, and also the 4th bullet point, I think I might be open to that one, but would want to think more about or hear others' thoughts on possible unintended consequences. But that 4th bullet point seemed potentially appealing as a policy to consider. The 3rd one, I guess I'd say maybe for paid work, but I definitely wouldn't want to prohibit it for I wouldn't want to say prohibit a former council member from coming to speak to us if they're doing so on a pro bono basis, just on an issue that was of importance to them. I actually really value hearing from former council members about policy matters if they don't have a financial interest in it. So, yeah, those.
So, couple of comments about those items in San Francisco. So, the San Francisco Code reaches way down into the organizational structure. Those bullet points 1 and 4 apply to all city employees. And so they're relatively narrow in their scope, but they're deep in their application. So if you, as a city employee, even at a low level, personally and substantially worked on a particular issue, you then are prohibited during the revolving door period, which I think is 1 year in San Francisco, from representing or doing any work on the matter for another entity. Also, you are prohibited from going to work for an entity that has a city contract where you worked on the contract. So, San Francisco is a very different jurisdiction, obviously, 25,000 employees, a complex, big city, and also a county. So, anyway, those are my comments on the way those features would work.
Yeah, so I guess those are my comments for now. Those are the ones that I flagged as kind of worth consideration, but I'd also like to hear from colleagues and their thoughts about those.
Mark?
Thank you. So, I mean, I think I'm kind of, pretty similar with Tom in regards to, I don't know that I see a reason to go from the current 1 year to 2 years. This isn't, as the city attorney mentioned, this isn't something where we have a problem or really had a problem. And I think 1 year is, seems to be, pretty good practice. I could be open to creating a little more kind of uniformity to who it applies to. So it seems like it already applies to a lot of directors, correct? So we'd just be adding on, there might be 5 or 6 that it doesn't apply to that,
Yes,
that we just create
a small number of new departments that are not in that list.
And so, I mean, I think that, that treating everyone the same makes sense. But I don't really have a lot of other comments to make at this time.
Okay. A couple questions. So first on who our current ban applies to, at the top of packet page 3, it says, wait a minute, did I get that right? That's our current, right?
The table.
Oh, sorry. Got it. Okay. And I think that we may not have a large issue, but we have had at least one occasion recently where a senior official within a year was in a position that conflicted here. And so whether that exhibits enough of, one, whether that is a problem, and two, whether it's enough of a problem to want to expand our policy are two different questions, but I don't think it's merely hypothetical. As far as commission members, I think the most practical impact would probably be our architectural review board. It be, I think it's been rare that we've ever had someone from the Planning Commission who would be bringing a project forward, but it's probably happened over time, or certainly there are scenarios where it could happen. But on ARB, it could happen quite often. Most of our architects are practicing architects in town, and if they do commercial work or multifamily work, then they could very possibly have something come forward. On the other hand, if almost any architect who would serve on the board would have that potential conflict, I don't know whether we would have the consequence of limiting our potential candidate pool for ARB. But I think it's something that that's where it would have an impact, and where I think there's a pro and a con. I think that there is some potential concern there of kind of a revolving door from an ARB, and there's a potential that we would limit our candidate pool considerably with such a prohibition. And then I did have a question on the San Francisco one, just this fourth bullet, where they prohibit employees from going to work for an entity that had a contract with the city in the preceding 12 months, where that former employee personally and substantially participated in the award of the contract. But how would that be enforced? Because are we saying that we would have some control over who they could subsequently work for, or would we have the control over the contractor if there was an active contract? And I'm not sure how that might work.
Chair Burt, you are almost eligible to be hired as an attorney for cities. I have a question about whether this is enforceable. Mm-hmm. Because these types of employment restrictions in the private sector, of course, are sometimes companies try to do this and say you can't go to work for a competitor, and our courts have said that that is not in fact a lawful and enforceable contract. And this reads a lot like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that this is anything more than aspirational or guidance or instructional as opposed to an actual enforceable.
Okay. Yeah. Tom?
I mean, there are non-recruitment clauses in private contracts, so maybe there's a clause in the contract that says you can't actively recruit employees.
I don't believe so. That's not typical in public contracts, and I used to work with this 47-page professional services contract quite a bit, and don't recall that there was a provision like that. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure what San Francisco's doing, if anything, on enforcing this, but it is in their code.
Okay, so we've had around Tom.
I missed one question. I had another comment. So on the summary for Palo Alto, it says ban may not apply to former official representing another without compensation. Is that may or may not, or shall not?
No, it does not. Where are you reading?
Page 7.
Oh, yes, our summary. So it would be more clear to say it does not.
Does not?
It does not. Our local ban
so if a former
bars, I'm sorry, Councilmember Du Bois, it bars
Compensation.
appointment, blah, 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 shall not for compensation act as an agent or attorney.
So if you're doing it without compensation, it's okay?
Yes, as if you're a volunteer or just an otherwise
Okay, I just want to get clear, and I thought it was okay, but so you can advocate for Avenidas or Buena Vista, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
You can. As an unpaid
As a couple
advisor.
examples.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think, again, on the commissions, I think probably ARB and HRB, actually, there are some architects who work on historic preservation. Right. But if the clause is just that you cannot, well, I don't know. I think it's worth exploring. You can't present to your own commission. I mean, maybe, and again, if there's a 1-year ban, I'm not sure it would have a big impact on recruiting necessarily. And again, we had kind of an uncomfortable situation where a commissioner got off, it was actively on the board and presented, which I don't think is good. So,
Yeah, so that applies to essentially a current commissioner, and we don't have a rule there. And I guess that begs one other question that we didn't address here. Molly, so as it applies to board and commission members, we had a recent issue where we had a current board member who left the dais to advocate before the commission he was a member of. And so I guess one thing we'd want to consider is do we want to create that ban at least of, even if we don't have it apply to a year out, would we want to say that acting board and commission members, we didn't have that alternative presented, right?
Yes, so that conduct is the subject of a specific state law exemption that is available only for architects, engineers, and designers, I believe, appearing before their own body. And the reason that the state law was crafted is because many of these types of design review boards, you face this difficulty where this is the professional work that people do. You want their expertise on behalf of the city, and yet folks aren't willing to do that public service unless they also can ply their trade and work, essentially. So there is a narrow exception. It's very narrow, and it limits also a lot of other types of conduct that can occur behind the scenes, and it's quite constraining. So it's fine for the city to make a stricter rule, but I simply note that the state legislature has reached the conclusion that it does make sense to allow that narrow exception in that particular area because it can be difficult to get qualified, locally invested folks to serve on those boards.
But we're permitted to be more restrictive.
You are.
Okay, thanks. Corey?
Just a couple of things. One, I think I heard 27 University mentioned earlier, and my understanding was that the former, correct me if I'm mistaken, I understand that the former Planning Commission member who was involved in that project was hired by the city, not by some outside private interest to present to the city. Was that correct?
Yeah, but I didn't hear anybody mention that one tonight.
I said I wasn't clear on.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page on that one. Thanks for confirming that. And then also just on this question about concurrent conflicts, for those positions, those people who are currently covered by our ordinance, I look at least the state ban goes into effect, for the 1 year after they've left, but does that or does our local ordinance apply while they're currently working for the city? Or does it just start after they leave? Is that clear?
It's yes. That silences me thinking. It is. The question is clear. So the revolving door restriction applies when you leave city service. There are other restrictions, however, that apply during city service, and that's why the sitting ARB member actually needed an exception in the state code in order to even be engaging in that conduct.
Okay, and also in that recent case with the ARB, if I remember correctly, that only was allowable for that person who subsequently resigned, but it was only allowable because I think they were a sole proprietor or something like that, where there was nobody else on their team who could do the presentation. They couldn't hand it off to a partner or something. Was that
so? There
correct?
are a number of factors. That's one of them. Another factor is that they can only interact with city staff to ask informational questions and answer questions about their drawings. There can't be any staff level advocacy, and this is what people often find limits their effectiveness in a kind of holistic role that they might wish to play. There is an exception for sitting council members and board members to appear in front of city bodies as an individual on behalf of themselves or their family. But otherwise, it would not generally be allowable for a sitting city official to appear for compensation on behalf of another entity. So we don't need a rule on that. We already have that restriction in the law.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, these are good questions and a good conversation. I mean, it is tough, especially when it comes to issues like, the ARB, and I don't know where this conversation is going, but, my concerns would really be what Pat was talking about earlier, which is, making sure that we don't disqualify every currently practicing architect in the city from being able to serve, because, and I mean, not to say that would happen, but it could come close. And as that ARB member who ended up choosing to resign, mentioned either in his letter of resignation or it might have been in a conversation to me separately, he said, I have to put food on the table. I have to have a career. And so, if there are things maybe that we can do just to, make sure that there is more transparency and these types of things, that could be one thing, but I'd be very hesitant of, creating more onerous rules that would create a consequence of really narrowing the applicant pool to just retired architects, for instance, because then you're really not getting, the best review that you possibly could. What's that?
Or outside of Palo Alto.
Yes, or, but it would have to be people who don't practice in Palo Alto. It wouldn't just be non-Palo Alto residents. It would have to be people who have no intention of having anything happen in Palo Alto. And so that's just, this is just a difficult thing.
So on this question of active board members, I actually think that I favor adding a restriction there. And as I think through the potential impact on folks who would serve, first, architects are not required to be residents, and residents who are architects may not have their firms here in Palo Alto. So both of those allow some degree of latitude that if you're a non-resident but practicing as an architect here, that could be restrictive if you have projects that go before the ARB. And most architects in our town are doing single-family homes. That's, if you look at the proportion, that's the bulk of the architectural work. There's only a few that do commercial, and out of the ones that do quite a bit of commercial that I'm familiar with, they're not necessarily Palo Alto architects. I think the one who's done the most recently is a Redwood City architect. I can think of another one who's a Menlo Park architect. So we're not, this is not predominantly architects who, the bulk of our architects on our ARB are not doing much work in Palo Alto on projects that appear before the ARB. Now, it's not that it wouldn't have any impact, so and we would need to be cognizant of that. But I do think it's problematic. This is, by the nature of it, it's not necessarily the fault of the architects who serve, but by the nature of it, it is as close to kind of certainly an appearance of a conflict or a revolving door as we have with some degree of frequency. Although I know in recent years when there were members of the community who raised this concern, we actually had members of the Architectural Review Board who said, we haven't had any of our members appear before us in the last several years. And it's also important to remember if it's not a sole proprietorship, this would not restrict a colleague from appearing. So I'm trying to think through all of the kind of subsets that it would either apply to or not apply to. And I don't think it would have a great impact on the membership of our body. Tom?
So I'm thinking about this, and I'm a little, I still wonder if we just want to say anybody on any commission should not be representing a project to that commission. I'm thinking about like the 1% for art program. You know, will we get into an issue?
Oh,
with
and
artists?
I wasn't meaning to restrict it to one
Okay.
body. I was just saying that
ARB.
that's where we have the bulk of our potential
Yeah,
conflicts.
so it might be better to make it more general, just
Yep.
there may be other things that we aren't thinking about. So I could see Historic Research Board,
Yep.
PTC, or the Art Commission.
No, I was just pointing at ARB because that's probably the greatest potential issue.
Yeah. So then I guess the question is it just active, or should there be a one-year policy, revolving policy?
My thought on that would be, since we don't have any policy at this time or any restriction, I'd feel better about going at this incrementally and not go too far too fast.
So can I try a motion?
Sure.
So I'd move that we add consistently to all department heads, and that active commission and board members cannot pitch to their own board.
Okay.
And then leave it to the city attorney to wordsmith that.
So, Councilmember Du Bois, just to clarify, so it would be active board or commission members should not make an appearance in front of their own board for compensation.
I kind of think with or without compensation.
Okay, we can certainly draft it that way.
I'll second that.
Yeah, so we had a couple of things in there. The first, the expansion to, the department heads, I certainly, cleaning up the language or updating that. I certainly support that. I'd kind of like to separate that out maybe into a separate motion.
All right, we can
but-
split the motion. We'll put it in two parts.
Yeah, I'd like to deal with that one maybe first and then come back to the other, which I think is more complex and I have more mixed feelings about.
Okay, well, the sequence doesn't really matter, but...
Well, should I speak to the second part now, or should we break it up first, vote on one, and then come back? That's why I just mentioned that.
Okay.
I'll let you decide on the procedure.
So, yeah, go ahead and speak to the department head issue first. We'll address that one first.
Okay, I think we've said enough about that one. I think that makes sense.
Okay?
So this is just saying it expands to all department heads?
That's, we've split the motion, and the first part is the one that pertains to expanding it to all department heads.
Gotcha. Got nothing to say to that.
Okay. All right, then, all in favor? Aye. All right, now that passes unanimously. Let's go on to the second part, which is prohibition of active board or commission members from appearing before their own bodies.
So before I make my comments about that, actually, just a question. Are we talking about concurrently, or for 1 year after, or both?
No, just while they are active board members.
Okay.
I thought
Not former board members, but active board members.
Okay. I think I'd be open to that. I'm not prepared to support that tonight. I'd kind of like to maybe do a survey of some of our current and former board members, and also maybe even some of our applicants who've applied recently who maybe weren't selected, but just to kind of do a survey, would this have dissuaded you from applying? Because this is really the core question, right? Does that substantially negatively reduce our applicant pool? That's my number one concern. I'd like to get some input from our applicant community on that. So that's my thought right now. But I'd certainly be open to exploring it once we have a little bit more info.
and input.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I appreciate the conversation that we've had about it here, but I'd be worried that there are just things that I'm not thinking of or that none of us are thinking of in terms of how it might apply, that I'm just not comfortable at this stage with definitively moving forward on that. I'd also want to know what, and I don't think this is represented in the staff report that we received, but I mean, are there any other cities that take that extra step above and beyond what the current state law says? What's that?
For 2 years, I think.
Yeah, so Foreign Commission.
We didn't look particularly at the issue of currently sitting board members.
Yeah, I
we
think this was
focused
more
on
meant for
post-employment
once they're off.
restrictions.
And so, I mean, I just don't have enough information in front of me to make a decision on this issue tonight.
So two things. One, if we were to seek that information, we have to see whether the city clerk could readily do that. And I guess I would also say that if we got responses back that there were some limited number of Board or Commission members who might say it was a conflict, that wouldn't necessarily dissuade me. Because I might still think that the fact that they would only serve if they could advocate before their own board or commission, I might find as problematic. But we don't have it occurring much, so I don't expect to. If we do a survey, I don't think we're going to see a very strong response. In practice, we don't have it. Whether people might not be doing it in practice, but might not want to give up the prerogative to do so. Maybe we'd see a few more hands get raised on that. But so I guess a question would be, and maybe we can have Beth get back to us at just an informational item at our upcoming Policy and Services Committee meeting to see whether this is would be a relatively simple thing to do, or whether this is asking the clerk to go through a more extensive process. So, does that seem fair?
Yeah, for me, I think it's really the appearance of conflict, and it almost doesn't. I think it's doesn't matter what the survey says to me either. Again, I just think it would be very odd to be on a lot of these commissions and boards and then get up and pitch to colleagues like you've been working with while you're actively on that board. I don't think it's something we want to have happening.
No, I think it could be very valid. I'm just, it was an issue that was presented 20 minutes ago, and I'm not prepared to approve it or deny it. That's something that needs a little more thought on my end.
And what we would be doing is only making a recommendation to the council.
Of course.
And so we have, by appearances, probably two of us who would be okay with going ahead with this recommendation to council. Molly, given that, and I'm not saying which way I'd go on this, but given that we kind of had a broad topic here, if we have, if it was something that was a necessary pass-through through the Policy and Service Committee, and say it was a split vote, it would still go to the council with that split recommendation. But on something that wasn't an explicit directive, does that still apply? Would two members be able to forward this as a split recommendation to the council or not?
Well, we're on a topic that's certainly closely related to what the committee was referred and to the agendized item, but it is somewhat on the edges because we didn't specifically explore this in the staff report or notice that there would be that kind of a regulation under discussion tonight. As a general matter, 2-2 votes out of committee have indeed gone forward to the council with that information, that there was a 2-2 or a 2 with 2 abstentions or something of that nature. Yeah. I don't think it's suitable, though, of course, for a consent item, and I wonder whether that's an efficient process to take kind of a complex item that hasn't been fully explored to council on its action agenda. Maybe it makes more sense if the committee wants more information to bring it back to committee.
Yeah. Okay. Tom?
So again, when I read the packet, again, that was one of the things that interested me. Page 15 is the text of San Jose's ordinance. I thought, again, I was interested in kind of a revolving door, so even a year after you were on a commission. And I think it's kind of a compromise. Councilmember Burt was saying, let's not even go that far and make it active only. But so I actually saw that as kind of less restrictive than the San Jose ordinance. But it seemed to be entirely, I guess, within the scope of this report.
So I think I'm fine with asking the clerk to come back and let us know whether this is a relatively straightforward thing to do, create a little survey of board and commission members.
So would the committee want to wait on the other item to decide if you were going to address the second item before it goes forward to council, or would the committee want that cleanup to add all the department heads to go forward on the council's consent agenda?
Corey?
On the city attorney's question, for me, that would really depend on guidance from staff on what it means for workload. If it's more efficient to do a survey of board and commission members, come back to us, let's have that discussion, and then decide all of our recommendations on this general topic and have that go together to council. If that's more efficient for staff, I'd prefer that. If it's we understand. If it's equal for staff, then I've no difference of opinion. And just by the way, on this second part of the motion, I would ask actually just for that part of the motion to be withdrawn, or change the language to be direction to staff to do that survey. Again, I'd be very open to considering that at a future time once we have more information. I want to make sure that it's clear that although I wouldn't support moving it to full council tonight, I'm very interested in continuing that conversation.
So I have a question of, if we do the survey, would the survey results change your guys' position, or should we just direct that it's a 2-2 vote, direct that the results of the survey along with the department heads just go straight to council, not even come back to us?
Well, I think Molly's answer to Corey's first question might influence that. So
generally, it's more efficient to package things together, but I think in this case, these two are somewhat different. The first one is really in the nature of a technical cleanup. It's kind of a no-brainer. It would be very simple to write. So I would recommend just moving forward with that. The second item really is a more substantial policy question. So I think it almost needs to be treated separately, and that would be my recommendation. Yeah.
So, and I think that we wouldn't be having the report back. I think we'd want to hear from Beth how much work we're, as a committee, assigning her to do, because we should be circumspect on requests for staff work that are at the committee initiative.
So just so I'm clear, so we're suggesting there'll be at least 2 other policy and service discussions on this topic?
Well, I don't know that we have to have a big discussion. We're just going to hear back from her. If it's easy and we say, great, go ahead with it, I don't expect that to be a big discussion. Corey?
Well, actually, let me make it more formal. I'd suggest a friendly amendment to this motion that we ask city clerk and city attorney to get back to us with their thoughts on what a survey of board and commission members would entail for staff time.
Well, wait a minute. You just expanded to the city attorney. I didn't think we were asking her to do anything.
So I probably will draft the question that the clerk will ask, but I can do that quickly and pass that off, and then she'll let you know
So that's my friendly amendment suggestion.
Okay. Yeah, it's really a substitute. It's not amending the direction. So we'll just take that as a substitute, and that's fine. I'll second it.
Well, I'm just, okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm just curious, is there, if Beth comes back and says, yeah, no problem, should we just have her go ahead and do it? I mean, leave it up
with
to her if she wants to just go ahead, or if she wants to come back and tell us, no, it's going to be a lot of work.
I'd be fine with that.
When is our next, I mean, I'd be fine with it also, but also, well, we've got a.
The 10th of November is our next one.
Okay. I mean, I don't have a problem with it if the chair doesn't see a possible concern.
Yeah, I'd be fine that if we should change the motion then that says that if the clerk determines that it's a minimal effort or a low effort to do this, then to authorize her to go forward. If it's more than that, to return to the committee for consideration.
Yeah, I'd accept that amendment.
Okay? All right. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. That passes unanimously. All right. Onward to our next item, which is staff recommendation that Policy and Services Committee recommend that the City Council, 1, accept the description of the status of the SAP security and employee ethics policy audits, and 2, establish a schedule for future audit recommendation status updates. Suzanne?
Chair Burt, council members, Suzanne Mason, Assistant City Manager. I apologize for Ed. He would have liked to have been here tonight, but he is out ill today. You wore him out last night, so. We are here. I have been working with Harriet Richardson, our city auditor, in developing a schedule to bring the open audits to you in an attempt to get those closed and before your body. You have a pretty full agenda. And so what we have before you and at your places is a schedule that shows how we're planning on over the next few months to bring to you open audits. And tonight we have the first 2 of those scheduled open audits to present to you. And as the report summarizes, this is for the SAP security audit and the employee ethics policies audits. And what you have attached is the summary that shows that all audit recommendations have been completed at this point. And staff is here and prepared. If you would request a summary, I can speak to the ethics policy, and we have staff from IT here, Jasmine Frost and Raj, I'm forgetting Raj's last, Patel, here, and they can answer any questions you might have on the SAP security audit. I did want to share one thing because I understand there was a question at last meeting, and I apologize, I wasn't here. I wasn't feeling well last time. But I do want to assure the committee that the ethics policy, which is found on the intranet site, which includes the code of ethics that was recommended by the auditor, also includes the hotline number in the policy. Staff have begun the training sessions on the policy. There are 26 training sessions planned between October 13th is when they were begun and May of 2016, so that every city employee will go through a 2-hour training on our ethics policy. We'll get situational questions. One of the executive leadership team members will be kicking off each session with the trainers. So it's a very thorough training. It includes this policy and related policies distribution, as also recommended by the city auditor in the audit. And also all options will be outlined as they are in the policy, but in the training they will go over and specifically call out the hotline as well. Thereafter, every new employee right now is getting a copy of the policy as well. And then we will schedule future trainings quarterly to make sure that all new employees continue to be trained on the policy. It's a very thorough policy, so I just wanted to provide that because I know the question came up at last meeting. And with that, staff's prepared to answer any questions you might have.
Questions, anyone? Tom, anything?
I have questions, but I always go first.
Get warmed up.
So I actually had some questions about the PCI audit and security audit.
Jasmine?
So on the middle column, it says status open, and then on the October 2015 update, it says many risk items have been addressed, but the remainder have been prioritized in roadmaps. So it doesn't sound like it's really all completed, but we're saying it's completed. I just wanted to understand what's still on the roadmap, what hasn't been done.
Okay. My name is Raj Patel. I am the Information Security Manager for the City of Palo Alto. And as indicated in this, there was two components to this assessment. One is a PCI compliance, and also another one is Information Security Risk Assessment. The PCI, which is Payment Card Industry Security Compliance, was conducted 1.5 years ago, and all the findings were addressed successfully to close all the gaps. The second component was Information Security Assessment. In 2014, June of 2014, City of Palo Alto has engaged a company called Coalfire to conduct Information Security Risk Assessment. And in June 2015, the company has concluded the Information Security Assessment, and all the findings, most of the findings were closed, and there are some remainder portion of the findings which we are in the process of addressing.
Okay. So again, it's kind of a question that, we're saying it's completed, but it sounds like there's still some work to be done.
I think, I just wanted to point this out because I had talked to Jonathan before he left. The recommendation here is that we should implement a formal risk assessment process that meets minimum standards as called out on the left-hand column. And what I understood is that the risk assessment is completed and it's now a real-time monitoring ongoing.
Yes.
And so it is
ongoing.
the assessment and monitoring is ongoing. They're still making some of the improvements that resulted from the assessment. So
Good.
that's,
Okay.
I think, the distinction that, because that question was asked.
Good.
So the
Okay.
monitoring is real-time,
Yeah.
ongoing.
Thank you. That makes total sense. I did have a question too about kind of this idea of minimum security standards and whether we're, again, if we're going to do this ongoing monitoring, are we going beyond that? And also, I wasn't sure when the audit was done. It sounds like 1.5 years ago,
In 2011,
has the
October.
So has the security situation changed in 4 years where we actually need to go beyond what the audit said in 2011?
Yes, and that is absolutely correct. The cybersecurity situation and landscape has been changed in last 4 years, and we have implemented ISO 27000 framework and also PCI DSS standard 3.1 compliance framework at the city to ensure that the city is ready to not only fight with upcoming cybersecurity threat, but in real time determining any threats and vulnerabilities, including, using our IDS, intrusion detection, intrusion protection, and firewall and FireEye devices which we have implemented. So we are ready and in compliant and also engaged with all the tools and technologies in today's world to ensure that city is protected from any cybersecurity threats.
Good. Okay. And so I'm familiar with PCI. What does an IST cover? What kind of data?
The PCI is a credit card information. Suppose if a utility customer is paying their bill, then their credit card information is being protected. So those are the credit card information.
No, I said I know what PCI is. What's the other one?
The DSS?
The PCI DSS, that
No,
was a
the-
data security standard, and the other one was, I think you are referring ISO 27001?
Yeah, well, it says NIST SP 853.
Oh, NIST, okay, NIST SP 833. It's an industry standard for information security risk management and information security compliance. The NIST 853 is also similar to ISO 27001, which is ISMS, Information Security Management System, which is comparative standard, which we have implemented at the city during last 3 years.
Okay. So it's basically protecting all data that's beyond credit card information?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I got your question now. Yeah, it's including but not limited to PCI. The ISO 27001 goes way beyond. It has 17 different types of standards, PCI standards, firewall standards, application standards, and so on and so forth. And we have implemented those all.
Okay. And then again, I just came on council this year. On the ethics side, I guess I was just curious about these dates. So the audit was completed in 2008. Is that correct? Yeah.
I will say that I was not here, obviously, and can't speak for what was going on. But I do have to say this is probably the most thorough policy I have ever seen in a public agency. I just want to say that if you look at the policy. And I know I have heard there's been a lot of discussion with the executive leadership team on what should be included in the policy and what should not be included. I asked a question about one word, and they said that was a whole set of meetings. So I do think the policy took quite a while to finish. And the training has been under design with ILG for quite a while. It's a very high quality training, and I would invite you to come view it and participate. It's really tremendous. There's a booklet. There are multiple handouts and resources being provided, and the ILG is going to use it as a sample for future, their future work. So I would say it's a very thorough product that is resulting, but I really can't speak to what really went on.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we're there now. I just hope we don't take 7 years on other things. Hopefully we can do them quicker, but I'm glad we're there. Thank you.
Corey?
No, I'm happy to see the ethics policy come in. It was when I joined council, it was something I was surprised when I saw we didn't have, and it has been a bit of a convoluted process. But it almost seemed, it sounds like, from hiring a consultant and having that not work out and making the decision to have staff do it themselves because of cost concerns might have yielded a better result in the end. And so that's good. And I was also encouraged to hear the thoroughness of the training, because what good is an ethics policy if staff doesn't know anything about it? And so I'm glad that, that's being taken seriously. Definitely, I'd encourage you to let us know, as the dates are getting locked in, because, given the interest that some of us have taken in it, and some of us are not, who recently joined council, the importance that it merits, it would be interesting to kind of sit in on one of the trainings and learn more about it. Right. I'm glad that we are where we are now, and it's great to hear that the ELT is taking it very seriously, because I think it's an important good governance aspect of that any municipality should have, and I think it's important for employee morale also to see that the city takes it seriously. So I'm glad we're closing out this audit.
Well, there's 2 trainings in November, and then the balance are January through April, concluding in May, and so I'll get you the dates.
First, just a quick question. You said this does include training around our hotline for employees reporting issues, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to emphasize how important I think that is, and I hope that staff will continue to consider ways to make sure that the hotline is fully effective, understood, and utilized to the greatest capacity possible. And that includes making sure that staff is confident in the confidentiality and effectiveness of the hotline, rather than any concerns among staff that things reported to the hotline might not be acted upon or might result in any potential retribution. Not to say that that is a problem, but there might be a perception of that among staff, and so I want to make sure that it continues to receive close focus from city management.
Okay. So we should take this one, our action would be a motion to accept the status report and forward it to council. Is that, yeah.
Second.
What was it? Did you move?
So moved. I move that Policy and Services Committee recommended the City Council accept the attached description of the status of audit recommendations. My mic's not on. For SAP security and employee ethics policies audits. So moving the staff recommendation.
Okay. Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. And, pardon me? Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So next is to establish a schedule for future audit recommendation status updates. And we have before us this schedule. And we have the auditor's office to discuss it with us, or how does this proceed?
Well, Harriet and I, Hunan's here, and Harriet and I have been working together to develop a strategy to close out the open audits, and whatever few remaining items remain in these audits, we've committed, and I've committed, to a very structured approach. And I know Harriet was, she knew she was going to have to miss tonight, but we talked in advance. But what I suggested, and she was supportive of, but we want to make sure you are, is that we bring back to you at your regular meetings 2 to 3 audits over the next 2 meetings that are from the past, and then the 2 that are scheduled for February were completed this year. And thereafter, if there are open audit recommendations, we will schedule those very specifically, and I am targeting them for 6-month increments from the date that your recommendation goes to the council. So I have a very detailed spreadsheet that I shared at the executive leadership team today, and that basically each department would get their update on the audit to us a month before it's due to you. We would make sure we're all in agreement and the auditor's in agreement, or we agree to disagree and share that as well. But that we will have a very targeted schedule, and these will come back to you on a regular basis and hopefully be closed out and responded to.
Great. Questions? Anyone? Tom?
So in that kind of schedule, 6 months, I mean, is the intention that you would close everything in 6 months, or is it likely things
Well,
would
it will
open?
really depend. I have to be honest, working with the departments on these has been pretty eye-opening, because some of them require quite a bit of work and resources and staff time, and balancing the recommended improvements with the day-to-day operations has proven very challenging, and that's why we're really trying to get these things closed. But even today, I was talking with ASD staff on the cash handling one, and getting out to every work site where cash is handled, making sure the training's been completed and making sure the review has been completed has been a real struggle for them, given balancing the day-to-day work. So I think our goal would be to respond, and on simple, changes and implementation, that we do those right away within 6 months. But it was my understanding your body wanted a update every 6 months.
I think, again, an update without pressure to say things are closed, even if they're not quite closed, is better, right? Even if it stays open and shows up again 6 months later.
Right.
But,
Yeah, I mean, I think Tom's absolutely right, and I mean, that this new policy will create a system where it won't take 7 years to do an ethics policy. I mean, just because it's something that it doesn't come out of the auditor's office and get approved by council and then go on a shelf and get dusty and ignored.
Right.
So I think that's I'm glad you're doing it.
Okay. I don't know. I think about it. There's no action on this, right?
No, I just want to make sure that with your agenda that you were in agreement with this
Right,
schedule.
committee schedule. All right, thank you. That concludes item number 2. And then we have before us a summary of upcoming meetings. And we just wanted to...
Question.
Pardon me?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I know November 10th is looking pretty beefy. I kind of felt like the Healthy Cities discussion last night was a pretty small item. I'm just wondering if we could add it on to that November 10th. If you guys think we could dispatch it pretty quickly.
I'll defer to the chair. Same.
No pressure.
Yeah, I'm just looking over the other items there.
I think 3 will be quick, and I'm not sure about the Bryant Street Garage.
You think 3 will be?
3 of them, 3 of the items.
Oh, I see.
The
Not
first
num-
item and the, well, there's
Chair
4 items.
I would just note, Chair Burt, that the agenda materials for the 10th get published to the public this
On Thursday.
Thursday. And I do think the city manager was wanting to do a little bit of work on that.
So maybe on December 8th, if we want to try to get it done quickly.
Or we talked about doing a special meeting. Pat brought that up.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at
See if we can get
the
that.
scale of the December 8th items. So the city council, the prep for the priority setting, trying to think about how much work that's been as a committee in the past.
Every year when this rolls around, I can't quite remember the process. It's a little bit, you have to dust off the cobwebs. Is this where the committee is receiving back the input from council members and kind of collecting it into buckets?
Yeah, I think there could be a moderate amount of work on that. Suzanne?
And also the public. We're soliciting the public right now on the website for input.
So we might want to go ahead and schedule another meeting because even the December 8th looks pretty full. And given that we have Thanksgiving week, first, how do you feel about scheduling one other meeting? Oops, pardon me. Great, thank you.
I guess as an alternative with starting earlier on the 8th and having a longer meeting. It'd be an alternative.
Yep.
I mean, I'm open to either, but
Yeah, I can do that. My only question would be, from a timing standpoint, could we? Folks last night had expressed a desire to get it approved by council by the end of the year. Do we leave enough time in terms of noticing and all that kind of stuff to still do that? And if it's pretty straightforward and ready to go, then December 10th would be for the 14th. Do we have a meeting on the 21st of December? So that means, so we're probably, and then I doubt we'd have one after that.
It's actually listed as the start of the council break. So I think it's tentatively planned to not have one.
Yeah. And I'd hate to have a meeting, full council meeting just to approve this.
So that's a good point.
yeah, I don't think there was any real-time pressure. It was just a desire to do it this year, right?
Yeah, the motion did not include any time scale, but certainly a desire to do it this year or very early the next year.
Well, actually, what we committed to was to attempt to do it this year and back to council.
If not explicitly, then implicitly.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do we feel about then an extra meeting? Are people looking at their schedules? Is that what's going on here?
Well,
Yeah.
also, so what would be in that extra meeting? Would we start on the council priorities? Or
Well, I think we would want to have the Healthy Cities item for sure. And it's a good point.
I mean, dewatering maybe?
Well, I was thinking that the council priorities, that is one that might even break up into two different meetings where we have a cut at it and then some feedback, possibly. But we could move it forward, and then if it needs a follow-up, it could have it on the 8th. So we could attempt it. Now, that would actually require, though, that staff would get out those surveys and get them back from council members by that time. So that's a little challenging.
And when
So
would that special
it's
meeting
on the
be?
agenda right now, or it's on the tentative agenda for December 8th right now? Okay, and so we're talking about,
Well, we're talking about whether, if we have a special meeting of P&S, principally for Healthy Cities, what else would go on that special meeting? And this was one of the items that we were considering moving forward. And then as I was thinking out loud on it, I'm not sure that we'd get the responses in time from council members. So maybe that's
for
not.
a meeting earlier than this?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Were you thinking
Okay.
like December 1st or when?
Well-
When we? For me, I think the timing. If we have a special meeting, I think figuring out the timing might be the first thing when we could have one, and then we can figure out what we might be able to have ready for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the two Tuesday opportunities would be the November 17th or December 1st, because the one in the middle is, I mean, we could do the 24th. I could. I don't know about other colleagues if they're leaving for the,
I think it's best to pass on
yeah.
that week.
So,
For staff too.
yeah, that's a good point. So November 17th and then December 1st seem to be the two Tuesdays. We could look at other Tuesdays, but there are other complications to that.
There's a lot going on the 17th. You've got Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, you have a Finance Committee meeting, and Parks and Rec.
And I have a possibility of traveling then. So let's look at December 1st.
There's a Finance Committee meeting
Yeah,
listed.
that's not an issue
but
for us.
I just want to make sure it's also not an issue for staff. If we're just doing the Healthy Cities thing, that probably won't be.
And staff can juggle that to see what can fit and what can't.
Utilities getting free.
Exactly.
So how does December 1st look, folks? Are you available for December 1st?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Then let's do December 1st.
Okay.
I just want to double check. Does everybody agree that doing a special meeting on the 1st is more efficient than doing a longer meeting on the 8th?
I'm sorry?
Well, we really have a couple options that were mentioned earlier. I wasn't sure if we had a clear decision about that, whether we wanted to have a special meeting or to just lengthen the meeting on the 8th. I'd be open to either.
Well, I think in terms of trying to, if the goal is to get this back to council, then the 8th doesn't work. By the end of the year, then the 8th doesn't work.
Right.
And
So for that reason, let's do December 1st.
and we'll make sure our colleagues appreciate it.
And then we should look at what other items could be pulled forward on the 1st, maybe one of the items from the 8th. So let staff make that call.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, unless we have anything else, that concludes our meeting.
All right. Thank you.
The neighborhood can't because it was supposed to follow both meetings in the town. So it could be the date. I don't think the priorities can because I think the public are respond by first.
That's Tabitha.